It's all about you, Jesus, and it's all about you. Remember we sang that? It sure is. It's all about Jesus. Everything in the Christian life goes back to Christ. Moses is the leader for the Jews, and you have Muhammad for the Muslims, but it's Jesus Christ, the founder of the Christian religion. And it's good. We sang about him. We put him to the forefront. But Dallas Willard, one of the great Christian intellectuals over the years, he raised the question, I think it was at our conference in Orlando once, he said, do we ever think of Jesus, I'm going to get this wire out, this is why I was never a sailor. All of these lines and everything, because I'm certainly bound to trip up in them, so as it turns out. Dallas Willard asked the question, do we ever think of Jesus as being intelligent? Intelligent. Do we ever think of Jesus as being the smartest man who ever lived? He would have to be, right? God in the flesh, he would have to be the smartest person who ever lived. Not that that matters in God's great kingdom, but it maybe helps us lead into what we're talking about. You see Jesus' smarts at work in Luke chapter 21, verses 1 to 4, because one way that intelligence shows itself is in perception. Perception. The ability to read people and things and situations. In the book of Revelation, he has eyes like a flame of fire. He sees through, he burns through things, he gets to the heart of worship that we were singing about. In Luke chapter 21, verse 1, a famous scene. He looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts into the treasury. We talk about giving today. I don't know why I stumble on this, but every January in our church was Stewardship Month. And I guess maybe I missed the habit of not talking about stewardship. But here are all the rich men. And we see in another passage, they used to blow the trumpet, right? Talk about how much they were giving. In my hometown, my small Anglican church, they used to publish, many churches do this, publish all the money people gave during the year.
Wow.
Can you believe that? It's amazing. The Anglicans have lived for 500 years.
Yeah.
And right at the top were my two cousins. They're the biggest sinners in the whole, everybody knew what they were like, and yet there they were, right up there at the top. And my father used to say, well, that just proves nothing. Right? So there you go. He saw a certain poor widow putting in the 2 mites, not very much. And now the perception, the intelligence, the smarts of Jesus comes into play when he said, let me tell you, my friends, this poor widow has put in more than all of them. For all of these have given out of their abundance. They can well afford to give. Like my cousins, they could well afford to give $200 a year, which was astronomical back when I was growing up. But she, out of her poverty, has put in all the livelihood that she had. And Jesus didn't reach into the box and say, here, I'm going to give it back to you because the people you're giving it to are totally corrupt. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, all of these people wanting to give. He didn't do that because that would have been an insult to her faith. And Jesus sees and he takes notice. And sometimes ministers are inspired by the things that people do. Like Judy is not here today, so I can talk about her. Judy Miata, you know Judy? Everybody knows Judy? One of the most inspiring things to me about, as we've started this new church together, is to see Judy struggling with her walker up the steps to get to the book club. And this is not a promo for book club, although it could easily be. She's struggling. Do you want me to help? No, I can do it. Now sometimes this dear lady here helps her. But what an example. She's struggling up to get up, and boy, she makes it. It's almost like a mini victory for the whole group. It means a lot. That, as my old history professor used to say, that gets me in the cigarettes. It gets you in the cigarette. That really gets to me. It really stirs, something of the same thing Jesus saw, I think. Once in a while, we're in sync all together with him. So Judy does that for me. And then, of course, when we have to leave, someone said, at one of the book clubs, someone said, well, your ride is here, because she gets this extended care ride. It was 4 o'clock, and we were waxing eloquent. She said, that's all right, he can wait. I thought, very good, double hitter. Jesus notices. He notices small things, and he notices small people especially. talking about giving and the different ways we are giving. Nothing shows more about us than the way we serve and the way we give. We are churchly people, and our church seems to be humming along here as we like church. You know, we will laugh at anything, we'll react to anything, we'll support each other, we'll back each other up. We're churchly people, but your pastor, Mr. Bernie Dizon, he has a heart for you, but he also has a heart for everybody else out there. He's got a heart for the great, big, wide world. It's been a consistent theme in his messages since we started here, is reaching the lost. You know, a famous archbishop said, the church is the only organization that exists for the benefit of those who are not its members. If you're in the Elks, if you're in the Moose, if you're in the lodges, you know, you're raised. But the church doesn't exist for itself. The church exists to have a mission to the world, and the mission is not the church's. As I've said before, the mission is God's through the Son by the power of the Spirit. We're involved in that. Look at Matthew 5, just 46. You know, Jesus is amazing. He's always ahead of us. He always surprises us. And this is right in the Sermon on the Mount, which is supposed to be the acme of Christianity. What is it Mr. McCullough used to call? Not the acme, but he used to joke about that word. Matthew chapter 5, verse 46. It is just very intelligent stuff. He just has a great proclivity to burst our bubbles. This young rabbi from Nazareth has a way of just tripping us up when we think we're doing great. We think we're doing great guns. And I feel it as much as anybody. Every once in a while, you know, we will do something good and something right by the grace of God. But in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 46, for if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Don't even the tax collectors do the same? Wow. What a puncturing of a lot of our pretensions. Even the tax collectors, even the Pharisees have buddies. Even Putin has friends. Even the IRS, you know, they took a survey a couple of years ago about how Americans look at their institutions. And Congress got 9%. Even the IRS got 46%. And Castro got 6%. So, you know, Congress is way down there. I wonder why. Anyway. But everybody has their buddies, they have their cliques, they have their groups they run with. The gangs, of course, are a gigantic problem in this country, especially here in Los Angeles. But even there's loyalty amongst thieves. So Jesus wants us to have the same kind of heart for the lost that Pastor Bernie has and that many of you do have. You don't have to be here too long before you see who's really working away. Churches don't just happen. Things don't just come together. You know, there's Mark in the back. Every time I see Mark, well, running the church again, Mark. You know, he's running around doing all these different jobs. There's an invisible workforce that's working. And that's great, because that makes us think about some of the response. Look at Matthew chapter 16. As we talk about giving, and 3 styles of giving, because you do it every week. I guess maybe that's what got me thinking. Is it's sort of like an offering is something we do every week. It can almost be a ritual. I grew up in a ritualistic church, so I know about ritual. And we pass the offering plate and all of that, like the old joke, do something religious, you know, when the plane is going down. And the pastor took up a collection, you know. All these old jokes work here very well. When you blend 2 churches together, you got a whole set of new quips to bring out there. Anyway, in Matthew chapter 16, maybe it's Luke 16, sorry. This is a good one. I have to compliment you because, yes, you do give and you have a heart for giving. And that's very important, because this can get very deceptive and if we're not careful, things can just become a ritual. But we talk about, I know Bernie tells me he's got people, they want to do mission, they want to do mission work, they want to be, but you're doing that. You're doing that every time you take up an offering. And I guess I'm just here to sort of remind you of that. You know, okay, just remind you, every time you put money in the collection, but this does sound like a financial pitch, doesn't it? Every time you put money in the collection plate, you are supporting somebody. Yes, you're supporting the salaries of those, but you're also supporting the mission of church to the world. Luke chapter 16, verse 9, and I say to you, make friends for yourselves by the unrighteous mammon, that when you fail, they may receive you into everlasting habitations. Might be translated better up there. Use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it's gone, you'll be welcome to eternal possessions. Well, you know, sometimes it pays to advertise, and sometimes the church has to be reminded of what it's doing when it gets together, because we can go on automatic too if we're not careful. But you do support mission. You don't have to do anything dramatic, you know, to, as the prophet said, you don't have to offer your son, you don't have to 10,000 barrels of oil. Just, you know, by coming here every week and giving an offering, you are supporting the mission of the church. And I want to highlight a group that we've been supporting, and I appreciate Pastor Bernie. He kept the budget exactly the same. We're revealing our state secrets here. He kept the budget exactly the same for this year. That's a very wise move, because it takes a while sometimes to know, where we're evolving, what we're doing. And we used to have our annual financial meeting. We'd just go over what we're giving to, what we're donating to. Is this still working? Is this still valid? And invariably, someone would add something to it, and that's good, because they were like abused women in Pasadena, a shelter for abused women. I've never been there, but one of the members on our finance committee knew a person who was working with them. I said, sounds like a good cause, put them on. Well, here's a group. I wish I had their logo to show you. Amigos Sin Fronteras. I think Steve's got the... Amigos Sin Fronteras is a mission of doctors and nurses and ministers to the poorest people of Mexico. And as you know, Mexico has some terrifically poor areas. And this is just to the south of Mexico City, up in the hill country of Mexico. And a man named Mr. Rafael Cifuentes, he used to be a member of the old Glendora church that met back there in the Masonic Hall in the 1980s, and he moved to Texas. And as we began to make our changes, he began to realize there's things he can do. So he joined this group, Amigos Sin Fronteras, which stands for Friends Without Borders. So you've heard of Doctors Without Borders. This is the Christian version. And since you donate, and since Bernie's kept it going, you are supporting this group, Amigos Sin Fronteras. You can tell they're doing good work. I had some better pictures, but I know here they're giving. Here's a little bit of a Bible message going out. It is a Christian group, but basically they take blood pressure. One of the biggest things people want up there in the hill country is eyeglasses, just to be able to see. How irritating it is when you don't have your glasses. I'm looking at you through the eyes of an Italian movie producer here. These are not my regular glasses. I fell over one morning on my glasses, broke my frame, and the lens just disappeared. I got the whole book club praying about it, but it hasn't worked yet. So this week I lost faith and went to Linden and got, you can't just get one lens, you got to buy the whole thing. Talks about financial stress there. But this is a mission that's going on how many times a year, Janet? Load up a great...
Whatever number they can.
Whenever...
At least two, sometimes three.
Yes, 2-3 times a year. Great big buses and trucks. They collect food. Yes, of course, it's what churches do. Like my friend, the most famous atheist in Duarte, I've got to know over the years, and he says, well, that was a great television show you had. But why did you bring the Bible into it? Which is the whole purpose, of course, is to lead people to that. Anyway, I said, well, and he talks about churches. His secret is that his father was a Baptist preacher, so that's the secret. So anyway, saying, churches do this, and they're, all of that stuff. And I said, while we've been talking, the Salvation Army has fed 10,000 people. That is just the ongoing mission. That's what's important. So we support that. We're rather proud of it. And the beautiful thing about using Mr. Cifuentes is we know it's legit. We know it's legitimate because we have one of our old Glendora members running it. That's why you give some of your money will go to SEP, GCI Next. You know it's legit. We know these people. So that's really, double for the money, you might say. So make friends of people in Mexico you don't even know, who will welcome you into the kingdom of God when the proper time comes. Friends of the mammon of unrighteousness. That's a great thought, isn't it? Well, there's lots of things. We usually highlight, sometimes throughout the year as we go through, we would highlight a mission that we're talking about. And it's all right to talk about money. It's quite legitimate. Jesus talked about money more than anything else because he knew that's where we were. That's where our heart was, you know. Isn't it funny, but his saying, where your heart is, there your treasure is almost true if you reversed it. Where your treasure is, that's where your heart is. It's one of these brilliant sayings we come up with. Well, anyway, I've got the 3 pastoral points. I've got to get these in. Giving and serving shows everything. 3 styles of worship. Number 1 is giving's opposite, which is taking. Giving's opposite, which is taking. I hadn't worked Steve so hard on Black History Month, I'd have him do a graphic of this, but figured he needed some time off. Giving's opposite, taking. Number 2 is merchandising. And that makes the world go round. Merchandising. It's giving to get something back in exchange. That's not necessarily wrong. It's a lot better than taking. And the third kind is godly giving, which we hope we will focus on. Giving's opposite is taking, and no one is immune to this. I've been reflecting back on ministry the last little while, being retired and looking back on the last 45 years. And truly, it sounds like a big humble thing to say, by the grace of God, I am what I am. By the grace of God, Paul said, I am what I am. There's a lot of things I didn't do, or a lot of things I did wrong, and Gord can tell you about some of those from the Toronto days. But, you know, God pulls us through, and we're like the facets of a diamond. And some of those facets are not always seen, and you know, but God pulls us through, and he sometimes takes our imperfect lives and makes something valuable out of it. And ministers have to be careful of why they do things. You know, it's almost like a reflecting on, we have to do what we do. I remember a minister in England, last time I was in England, this guy gave me a book. It's called, Who is Being Served? Who is being served? Like Pastor Burby very kindly said, boy, it's really nice that Pastor Neil stays around and runs the book club. Yeah, it is nice, but I like it. You know, it's what I do. You know, it's something used to, back in the grim days of Ambassador, used to say, we don't want to hear what you can do so much as if we can fill in some of the holes in your character. And that is not a process I recommend, but it can be effective. Let's think about Gehazi for a minute. Gehazi, the taker. In 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 20. The New Testament has the principles, but the Old Testament has the case histories. And that's one reason why the Old Testament is so valuable. It's chock full of case histories of people who did right things and wrong things. Chapter 5, you well know, Naaman, captain of the king of Syria, has a great reputation as a general, but he's a leper, and he goes and captures people in Israel. One of them's a little girl, a little maid. And Naaman's a leper, and this tremendous blot on his whole life. And the little girl pipes up and says, you know, there's a prophet in Israel who can heal you. It's, you know, out of the mouths of children, as we say. And so he goes down, and I remember teaching this in kids class. We had a little textbook called The Man Who Took 7 Baths. The man who took 7 baths. So, you know, he comes down in his chariot, great big, you can have seen the movies, you know the way it was. And he meets Elisha. Elisha doesn't even come out to meet him. He sends Gehazi, his servant. And what does Elisha say? He says, if you will wash in the Jordan 7 times, you'll be healed. And Naaman gets in a huff, and he just, you know, turns around the chariots. The Bible is so picturesque. And heads back to Syria. But his servant in the chariot says, as they're riding along, you can imagine, you know, but my Lord, if he'd asked you to take 100 cities, you would have done it. What harm is it to bathe in the Jordan 7 times? You might as well try it, right? Wise servant. So he does, and he gets healed. And then he wants to reward Elisha. And Elisha says, no, go in peace. This is not what we're here for. But in verse 20, Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, He was a minister. This is germane for us. He said, look, my master has spared Naaman the Syrian while not receiving from his hands what he bought, but as the Lord lives, I will run after him and take something from him. And Gehazi had been a good servant up to this time, but you're never immune to the temptation of covetousness. Now, for most ministers that I know of, it's not so much greed for wealth and money, and it's not even sex. Believe it or not, people think that's the great secret sin of ministers after the last 20 years of exposés. But no, what it is it's power. It's the desire for power. And it's the desire to have people look up to you and, aren't you great? And, that's a very great temptation. It's a form of covetousness. But it was Jesus who said, beware of covetousness. So Gehazi pursued Naaman, I'm thinking about Seinfeld. So Gehazi pursued Naaman. When Naaman saw him running after him, he said, is it well? He said, all is well. My master has sent me, saying that just 2 young men of the sons of the prophets have come to me from the mountains of Ephraim. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 changes of garments. Oh, this is pretty dastardly stuff. This is using divine intervention to get physical prosperity. Now, we don't see that in Christendom today, do we? When you write for the holy water from the Jordan and all the different things that come on, we see all kinds of manipulation from even the churches, and we have to be careful as ministers. It is so good to get this minister career over in a way. It's so good to land on the other side and look back at it. I'm having a great time going through all the memos and letters and stuff like that we'll keep or throw out. But it is amazing that we make it. It is amazing that we make it. Truly by the grace of God, we are what we are. God takes our good stuff. And thank God the brethren don't get to see a lot of the bad stuff. Some ministers portray themselves, there is no bad stuff. Look at me, I'm in a stained glass window already, posing for my stained glass window. Giving's opposite is taking, and taking in a very malicious way. And the second one is merchandising. Now, if I had I got my whiteboard, but I can't find my tripod. If I had my whiteboard, I'd draw this very cute diagram of an exponential curve. You know what those are, right? You have something on the left and something on the right. And I would draw, I've done this before, so it works. I would draw the very bottom tending to oblivion, taking, the opposite of giving. And then I would draw another line that's a lot better than taking. It's a lot better than taking. It's giving to get something in return. And so that line would sort of end up in the middle. You can see it, right? Do I have to draw another line for you? Double line. That's a lot better. That makes the world go round. The kids at Starbucks, whom I love to, talk to and palaver and all of that stuff. Oh, Starbucks, man, right here. It's just a great thing that they're out there working and hustling, and McDonald's driving them crazy there. If you look behind them, what's going on at McDonald's, they're working away. This is great. Everybody's out, and this is the great American system of free enterprise. There's nothing like it in the world. Dale Carnegie and all of these different things. It's all right. It's better. And GM, it makes the world go round. It's giving to get something in return. And we would say that's a lot better than taking and stealing. But is it what God has in mind? That makes you think, doesn't it, about the 3 different styles of giving. Yes, what is God driving at? You have to think about it because it applies to us in the church. Jesus loved Martha and his sister Mary. And Jesus will always upset the apple cart. He's, in some ways I'm looking forward to seeing him, but he knows too much. He knows a lot. And I'm hoping only by the grace of God. By the way, I was thinking about my cousins, the 2 cousins who gave the highest, and there was 2 of the biggest crooks in the town everybody knew. And I was thinking about that one day and talking to someone. I said, it's only by the grace of God they're going to make it. And as Anthony said, I heard God talking to me, and he said, it's only by the grace of God you're going to make it. Everybody's getting in there by the grace of God, as it turns out. So Martha, let's think about Martha. And I don't have anybody in mind here in the church. I see people running around working and serving, and that's great. But when push came to shove, Martha was serving because of Martha. you know that Martha was off track? One reason is because she criticized Jesus. That's not a good sign of spiritual health, to confront the Lord of hosts, And remember, she's running around. You can just imagine pots and pans going everywhere, all of this, and she's running a terrific household, Dead man floor if you spit on the floor is the old, dead man for sure if you spit on the floor, the old French-Canadian poem. And then Mary is just sitting there listening. That's what you're doing today. We're all sitting listening to the Word. And you would think that Jesus, in a way, wouldn't you think that he's going to take Martha's side? That Martha says, look, Lord, I'm just killing myself, and Mary's sitting in here listening. She's not doing a thing. Martha's having her, Tuesday snit. And you think Jesus said, that's right. The interesting thing about ministers is, ministers like Martha, because they do all the work. They do all the work. You have to be careful about that. When my aunt died, my beloved aunt who taught me how to pray when I was at the age of 7, when she died at her funeral, her pastor said, this woman combined the best traits of Martha and Mary. She was really into listening to the Word and the sermons, but she's also a great servant. So Martha says, Lord, why don't you speak to my sister now? Tell her, come on, you got to give us some help here. Jesus once again freaks us out. And he says, Martha, you're doing great work, but Mary has chosen, she's made the wise decision. She's listening to the Word of God. And you think, once again, Jesus. Obviously, Martha has got a lot of herself wrapped up in her service, right? The worst thing about giving a sermon like this is, when you hear it, you think, I'm never going to do anything good again. I don't know when but we do that. We do that to ourselves. And yes, it's great. It's great that we have book club, but I like that. I'd do it even if I wasn't getting paid, Bernie. Which I'm not. So that's the way we are. We can easily say, we're just doing great. But if you're going into ministry and service, always watch for that. Who is really being served? And our motives are very rarely pure 100%. But God wants to use us, and you see that. And so you pray and you ask God to take your humble sacrifice and make it work. Is this making sense, yes, by the way? Yeah, okay. Or as Gene Scott would say, am I boring you? Number 3, of course, is godly giving. And that's wonderful to think about, because that's Jesus to a T. That's giving with no strings attached. When we send migosinfront into southern Mexico, we don't get anything out of that. It's all give. It's all putting out. And whatever else you're doing in your private Christian life, which all kinds of people can do. When we do that, we're not expecting anything back. That's godly giving. That's Luke chapter 6. Let's go there. Going back through all of my papers, I come across a lot of Mr. Armstrong stuff. Not all of it was wrong by any means, because one of his great mottos was, towards the end of his life, right? He said there's only 2 ways of life. One is the way of get, and one is the way of give. That was a very profound insight to see that, can you really make it that? Yeah, you really can when you stop to think about it. Godly giving. Luke chapter 6 and verse 30. Give to everyone who asks of you. I can't remember, Janet was on the committee and Emmett and people like that. Very rarely if people came with a cause that looked good and that we could verify the source, that we would turn it down. We had a man showed up here about 8 or 9 years ago. You're going to get people walking in as time goes on. And the man showed up and luckily he ran into Miles Johnson. Miles Johnson, one of the best elders any church has ever had. And Miles and he said, well, I'm from Ohio and I'm supposed to work at the LA Fair. And I don't, they were supposed to put me to work today. So we're just flat out of money. We don't know where the next, we don't have any room. We don't know where the next meal is coming from. Luckily, he ran into Miles Johnson because he didn't get the IRS form and stuff like that. And Miles said, hold it, I'll talk to the pastor. And I said, oh, is that right? Well, let's find out a bit. Well, he says he's got his wife and 4 kids out in the car. It was a steaming hot day. And I said, oh, call him in. Call him in. So, it was just a beautiful scene. His wife comes in, and the perception that you have after a while, she is so embarrassed. She is so mortified that they don't have any money or anything like that. And then she comes in and stands there right in the back. I remember it vividly. And all the kids are like, bing, 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 bing. So when you got a wife with 4 kids looking embarrassed and a man who looks honest, we have Jack the Ripper, trying to infiltrate the church. So to make a long story longer, a little guy grabs me by the coat and said, Mister, are you going to make sure we have a place tonight? I said, well, not me, but this man, Miles Johnson, where's our treasurer? He was out at the time. So Miles went, and Miles gave him his whatever cash he had, and said, we'll reimburse Miles for that. That was just a nice little story that people walking up, give to him who asks. Oh, I know there's all kinds of stipulations and, small print, and you got to be careful. And oh, yeah, of course you do. But generally speaking, the church, another lady came in and with her daughter, and she says, thank God you were open today. You're the only church open. Yes, Saturday. We're the only church open. And she ended up, I have her letter in my files, how we didn't have the treasurer again with us, so we each shelled out $20. And, some of this stuff can be very simple. Give to him, that when you read it, you know it is. From him who takes away your goods, don't ask them back. Jesus has the standard. That's not the way the world lives. Martin Luther, I was reading Luther last night. He said, Christianity is all suffering, suffering, cross, cross. Christianity is giving up things, giving up your right to revenge. And just as you want men to do to you, do to them likewise. But here he goes again. But if you love those who love you, what credit is that? Even sinners love those who love. Isn't this smart? So smart. He's so brilliant. You just don't fool him. The brilliant young rabbi from Nazareth. I had a Jewish person who converted whom I baptized, and they said, I'm not worried about Moses. It's that young rabbi from Nazareth who really gets me thinking. For if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that? Even sinners do the same. Yeah, you can even in the right sense be ripped off. Roger Lipros said he gave money once and said, I think that guy's ripping you off. And Roger, so what? I can still eat. I can still have a roof over my head, having food and raiment. Let us be content. And if you, now this is the corker. If you lend to those from whom do you receive back, that's merchandising, see. That's what the world runs on. What credit is that? Even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much back. So if you're with me on the chart, this would go way up here. This is godly giving. It's altruism. And then he says, love your enemies, do good, lend, hoping for nothing in return, and your reward will be great. And you'll be sons of the highest, for he is kind to the unthankful and the evil. My 2 cousins he tolerated for so long. Therefore be merciful, just as your Father also is merciful. But mainly to realize that every time we meet here, you're doing mission. When you donate to the offering plate, you're doing mission, and churches and ministers should never apologize for that. Rather, we should talk about it probably a bit more often. I saw Ted Turner the other night on television. He said, what's your motto? And he said, early to bed, early to rise, work like heck, and advertise. So it's not bad sometimes for the church to advertise. So, as Paul said, let us keep forward in the mission, knowing that however much we give, we will get back in return. Let's pray. Once again, gracious God, Father in heaven, thank you for your people. Thank you for them like Mary listening to the word. Thank you for Jesus who challenges us, who keeps us on our toes. We can never rest because he is perfect and he's whom we're trying to follow. So thank you for him, for his plan, for his words, which we heard today. All of this we ask in his holy name.